I should have known something was wrong the moment I pulled up to Camp Hanita. The sky was a bruised purple-grey, a thunderstorm creeping in from the west, but the air was unnervingly still. No birds sang, no cicadas buzzed, just the heavy silence of dense Adirondack woods pressing in from all sides. My car's headlights sliced through the growing gloom as I rolled past the rusted iron gate swinging on creaking hinges, the peeling wooden sign hanging crookedly. Camp Hanita, since 1902. It felt like stepping into a forgotten time capsule. I was Jake, 22, fresh out of college, hired as a camp counselor for the summer. I'd worked other camps before, nothing unusual. But Hanita was different. The locals had warned me. They said there were strange rules to follow. Camp Hanita's no ordinary summer camp, old Mr. Bowen, the gas station attendant, had said with a grim smile as I filled my tank. Stick to the rules, Jake. Don't break 'em, and you'll be fine. Break 'em, and you won't be around to tell. I laughed it off, chalking it up to small-town superstition. But then the camp director, Ms. Reed, handed me a battered notebook on my first day. A list of 10 strict rules, each written in shaky cursive on yellowed pages, some stained with age or what looked like dried blood. Read these carefully, she said, eyes flickering like candlelight. They're here to keep us safe. Rule 1, never go beyond the tree line after dusk. Rule 2, do not enter the old caretaker's cabin. Rule 3, never speak the name Beaumont. Rule 4, do not swim in Lake Whisper after midnight. Rule 5, never leave your tent unzipped at night. Rule 6, always keep a fire burning. Rule 7, do not follow the sounds of the whistle. Rule 8, do not look into the mirror between midnight and 2 a.m. Rule 9, never take anything from the forest. Rule 10, if you hear the tapping on the cabin door, do not answer. I thought they were campfire stories designed to scare the kids, harmless, maybe even fun. But then, on my very first night, I heard the whistle. It wasn't a whistle like you blow through your lips. It was thin, eerie, almost like the wind was sighing through broken glass. It came from deep in the woods. I froze, heart hammering, remembering Rule 7, do not follow the sounds of the whistle. Curiosity and dread tangled inside me, but I forced myself to stay put. The whistle stopped. Silence returned, but the hairs on my neck stood on end. That's when I noticed the strange marks etched into the bark of the trees. Ancient symbols, half hidden by moss and darkness. They looked like a warning. By morning, I was questioning everything. Who made these rules? What was the truth behind them? And why did the forest feel so alive, like it was watching? The campers arrived the next day, laughing and oblivious, but I could see it in their eyes, unease. They felt it too. The air at Camp Hanita wasn't just thick with pine and fog. It was heavy with something older, something waiting. I don't know how long I can last here without losing myself. Tonight I'm keeping the fire burning. The night crept over Camp Hanita like a thick, suffocating blanket. I sat near the campfire, its flames crackling defiantly against the creeping chill. Around me, the campers had finally drifted off, lulled to sleep by exhaustion and the false comfort of their tents. The wind rustled the branches overhead, whispering secrets I didn't want to hear. I pulled the notebook closer, rereading the rules by firelight. Each one seemed more like a desperate plea than a guideline, warnings etched in fear and ink. But the questions gnawing at me weren't about the rules themselves. It was what lay behind them. Why was Beaumont such a forbidden name? Why the caretaker's cabin? And most terrifyingly, what was that whistle I heard earlier? I felt the shadows pressing in from all sides, and for a moment I almost believed the stories Ms. Reed had told me during orientation. Stories about the original camp founder, a man named Silas Beaumont, who vanished mysteriously after making a dark pact with the forest spirits. The locals whispered about curses and rituals, about a sacred boundary no one was meant to cross. Suddenly, the fire sputtered. A cold gust swept through the clearing, snuffing out the flames. Darkness swallowed everything. Heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight and scanned the tree line. That's when I saw it. Glimmering eyes reflecting faintly in the blackness, watching from just beyond the tree line. I froze. A low, rhythmic tapping echoed from the direction of the old caretaker's cabin. Rule 10. If you hear the tapping on the cabin door, do not answer. My breath hitched. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, like knuckles rapping on wood. Jake. A soft whisper brushed my ear. I spun around. No one was there. The tapping stopped. The fire suddenly reignited, casting flickering shadows across the clearing. My flashlight flickered out, leaving me with nothing but the fire's glow. I didn't sleep that night. When dawn broke, I discovered strange footprints circling the campfire. Large clawed prints that didn't match any animal I'd ever seen. Ms. Reed found me staring at them and said, "You've seen the signs now. The forest watches, and it remembers." Her words sent a chill down my spine. The campers carried on with their routines, but I knew the night had changed something in the woods, and in me. I resolved to understand these rules, no matter the cost. By the third day at Camp Hanita, the unease had settled into my bones like an old ache I couldn't shake. The forest whispered constantly, soft, urgent, as if trying to warn me of something I wasn't ready to face. Ms. Reed kept a careful distance but was always watching, her eyes sharp like a hawk's. She never pressed me, but the notebook with its 10 strange rules weighed heavily in my backpack, like a secret I couldn't escape. Curiosity clawed at me. Rule 2 forbade entering the old caretaker's cabin, yet it was the only place in the entire camp that seemed untouched by time. Weather-beaten and boarded up, the cabin sat at the edge of the woods, half swallowed by moss and shadow. One afternoon, while the campers were at the lake, I found myself wandering closer. The silence was oppressive. Even the birds had vanished. The door was sealed with rusted nails, but the wood was thin in places. Something dark lurked inside, or perhaps was imprisoned there. As I traced the carved symbols on the cabin's walls, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. My breath fogged in the air. A faint tapping echoed from within. I jumped back. Remembering Rule 10, my heart pounded. If you hear the tapping on the cabin door, do not answer. That night I asked Ms. Reed quietly, who was the caretaker? Her gaze hardened. His name was Ezra Grady. He vanished one winter after trying to stop something. The forest claimed him. She didn't say what something was, but the fear in her eyes spoke volumes. Later, I found an old, yellowed photograph tucked inside the notebook. It showed Ezra standing proudly by the cabin, holding a strange amulet, antler-shaped, weathered, and darkened with age. I had seen that symbol before, etched into the trees, carved into the cabin door. The next night, the tapping returned. It was slow, deliberate, like a summons. I stayed locked in my cabin, fire blazing, hands trembling. Outside, the wind carried a low whistle, eerie and unnatural. Sleep evaded me. I began to suspect the rules weren't just warnings, they were barriers. Thin lines drawn between our world and something far older, far more dangerous. What had Ezra tried to stop? And was I next? The forest around Camp Hanita seemed alive in a way I couldn't explain. Not just trees and animals, but something older, deeper. The kind of presence that shifts the air and warps the shadows. During the day, the campers were oblivious to the weight pressing down on the camp. They played, laughed, and splashed in Lake Whisper, their voices echoing off the water. But at night the woods whispered. Low, indistinct murmurs floated on the wind, just beyond hearing. I tried to rationalize it. The isolation, the stress of my first summer job, maybe even fatigue. But the symbols carved into the trees, the strange marks on rocks by the lake, the inexplicable cold spots, they were undeniable. One evening I met Jessie, a fellow counselor. She was new too, with sharp eyes and a quiet confidence that intrigued me. "You've noticed it, haven't you?" she said as we gathered firewood near the tree line. "The whispers. The forest isn't just trees here, it's something else, something that watches." I nodded, reluctant to voice my fears aloud. Jessie pulled a worn, leather-bound book from her backpack, a journal filled with sketches of symbols, notes about old legends, and fragments of history. "Hanita means the place where spirits go in the Mohawk language," she explained. "This camp was built on sacred land. There are stories of forest guardians, ancient watchers who protect the boundary between our world and whatever lies beyond." I remembered the antler amulet in the photo of Ezra Grady. Jessie's journal had drawings of similar symbols, horns, antlers, twisting branches, motifs common in many forest spirits and deities across cultures. "What about the whistle?" I asked. "And the tapping on the cabin door?" Jessie's face darkened. "They say the whistle is the call of the watchers. If you hear it, it means the boundary is thinning. The tapping is something trying to get in, or maybe trying to get out." I swallowed hard. "But why the rules?" I pressed. "Because the watchers are old and their sense of justice is cold. The rules keep the balance. Break them and you invite chaos. Sometimes the watchers take someone to restore order. Sometimes worse." That night we sat by the fire and read from her journal. One passage caught my eye. "The forest breathes with ancient memory. It remembers every broken oath, every forbidden step. The watchers are both prison guards and prisoners, bound to keep the balance at any cost." Sleep was uneasy, haunted by shadowy figures glimpsed at the edge of the firelight. As I lay awake, the whistle returned, closer this time, urgent and mournful. I felt it, the weight of the watchers, waiting. The following morning, the camp was restless. Word spread quickly. One of the campers, Emily, was missing. Emily was a bright-eyed 12-year-old with a curiosity that sometimes got her into trouble. She'd been wandering near the edge of the forest the previous afternoon, close to where the old caretaker's cabin stood. I was part of the search party. We combed the woods for hours, calling her name, hearts pounding with a growing dread. But the forest was unyielding, swallowing our voices in its vast, tangled shadows. By late afternoon, Ms. Reed gathered us all by the main lodge. Her face was tight, her usual calm replaced by something harsher. "Emily disappeared near the tree line," she said quietly. "Remember the rules. Especially Rule 1. Never go beyond the tree line after dusk. The forest is not kind to those who cross its boundary." I glanced at the notebook in my pocket, its pages suddenly feeling heavier. The rules were no longer just warnings. They were desperate barriers. That night, the wind howled through the camp like a living thing. Around the fire, the campers were quieter, their earlier excitement replaced by nervous glances toward the woods. I sat with Jessie, sharing what little we knew. "She could still be out there," I said. "We have to find her." Jessie shook her head. "The forest doesn't lose, not here." The tapping on the cabin door returned again, slow and deliberate. This time the campers heard it too. One boy gasped and ran toward his tent, zipping it up quickly. I stayed by the fire, my gaze drawn to the tree line where the dark shapes seemed to pulse with life. Suddenly a faint whistle cut through the night, sharp, eerie, unmistakable. I stood, heart hammering, feeling the weight of the watchers pressing down. As if on cue, a figure emerged from the shadows near the cabin, a silhouette tall and thin, antlered, impossible. The campers screamed and scattered. But I stood frozen, caught between fear and fascination. The watchers had come. The figure stood just beyond the firelight, its antlered silhouette towering against the flickering shadows. Its eyes gleamed with an unnatural glow, ancient, knowing, and merciless. Time seemed to slow. The forest itself held its breath. I wanted to run, to scream, to tell everyone to flee, but my legs refused to move. Then, from the darkness, a voice whispered inside my mind, not spoken aloud, but echoing through my thoughts. "You have broken the boundary." I understood immediately. Emily's disappearance wasn't a random accident. It was a consequence. The Watcher was here to remind us of the rules, to enforce them. "Why?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure if the Watcher would answer. "Balance must be maintained. The forest remembers. The pact endures." I thought of Beaumont and the founding of the camp, of the ancient rites Ms. Reed had hinted at but never fully explained. The Watcher lifted a hand, long fingers curling like branches. The girl trespassed. She awakened what sleeps. The boundary weakens. A cold chill swept through the clearing. The campers huddled closer, eyes wide with terror. I glanced at Jessie, who was pale but steady. "We have to fix this," I said. "There has to be a way." The Watcher's eyes narrowed. "There is only the rules. Follow them or suffer the cost." Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure melted back into the woods, vanishing into the mist. The fire flickered back to life, the night's silence returning like a heavy curtain. No one spoke for long moments. Finally, Ms. Reed stepped forward. "Tomorrow we begin the rituals," she said grimly. "The forest demands its due." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The camp was no longer just a summer retreat. It was a battleground between the living and the ancient. And I was caught in the middle. The dawn broke grey and heavy with fog, as if the forest itself was holding its breath for what was to come. The campers gathered reluctantly, their faces pale and eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and dread. No one spoke of Emily, not aloud, but the absence of her laughter and footsteps lingered like a shadow hanging over everything. Ms. Reed called a meeting by the main lodge. Her usual composed demeanor was cracked now, revealing a tense urgency beneath. "Before we move on, please donate me in the form of subscribe. We must perform the rituals to restore balance," she told us. "This is the only way to keep the Watchers at bay, and to bring Emily back." I glanced around at the other counselors. Jessie's expression was resolute, but I saw the fear flickering behind her eyes. "The rituals." I hesitated. "What do they involve?" Ms. Reed pulled the notebook from her bag and flipped it open. The pages had been worn soft from years of use. The strange symbols and rules seemed to shift beneath the firelight, as if alive. "These rituals are tied to the land and the spirits that guard it," she explained. "We must offer a sacrifice, not of blood, but of promise, to honor the Watchers, to reaffirm the boundaries. Only then can we hope to undo the damage." Her words sent a chill through me. "What kind of promise?" I asked. Ms. Reed's eyes locked onto mine. "A vow to respect the land and its secrets, to obey the rules without question." She handed me the notebook, pointing to a new rule scrawled hastily on a yellowed page. Rule 11. When the Watchers call, one must swear the oath of silence and guardianship, or be claimed as the boundary breaks. The others read over the page with growing apprehension. The campers looked to us, desperate for reassurance we couldn't give. The first ritual was to take place at the edge of the forest, where the caretaker's cabin stood silent and foreboding. Ms. Reed led us there, her lantern casting long shadows over the moss-covered ground. She began to chant softly, words in an ancient tongue that made the hair on my arms stand up. The forest responded with a low hum, a vibration in the air that felt almost tangible. Suddenly a breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the faint scent of pine and something else, something darker, like earth turned over after a grave had been disturbed. Then came the tapping. The cabin door, slow, insistent. I glanced at Jessie. "Do we answer?" Ms. Reed shook her head. "Number the ritual demands patience." The tapping stopped. A sudden snap echoed through the woods. We turned to see a figure standing just beyond the trees, a man, tall and lean, with wild eyes and tangled hair. He held something in his hand, a twisted branch shaped like antlers. "Who's that?" I whispered. Ms. Reed's face tightened. "That's Ezra Grady's descendant, or what's left of him." The man stepped forward, his gaze fierce. "The Watchers grow restless," he said. "The land remembers. It wants blood." Jessie frowned. "Blood? But you said sacrifice isn't blood." He shook his head. "The Watchers take what they must. Sometimes promises aren't enough." The forest seemed to close in around us, shadows thickening, whispering threats I couldn't quite understand. As the ritual continued, I felt something change deep inside me. The Watcher's presence was no longer distant. It was inside my mind, a cold pulse that made my vision blur. Ms. Reed spoke again, her voice urgent. "We must find the others, those bound by the Watchers. Only together can we hold the line." I knew she meant the living boundary, the ones who could see beyond, who understood the price of crossing the forest's threshold, and I realized with a sinking heart, Emily's disappearance was only the beginning. The forest held its breath long after the ritual ended, as if waiting for something or someone to respond. But the night brought no answers. Emily was still missing, and the Watcher's presence seemed to thicken, pressing down on our minds like an invisible weight. Ms. Reed gathered the counselors in the main lodge late that evening, her face drawn and pale. "We need to find others like us," she said quietly. "The living boundary, the ones who can sense the Watchers, who have inherited the burden. They are the only hope to reinforce the balance." I exchanged a glance with Jessie. Neither of us fully understood what Ms. Reed meant, but the gravity in her voice left no room for doubt. "How do we find them?" I asked. Ms. Reed hesitated, then reached for the notebook. She flipped to a page filled with faded photographs and hurried notes. Years ago, before the camp was built, others lived here. Some were lost to the forest, others vanished without a trace. But a few remained, hidden in the shadows. Their descendants may still carry the Watcher's mark. She showed us a photograph, an old black and white image of a group standing at the edge of the forest, their eyes dark and unreadable. In the background, the silhouette of a man with antlers stood apart from the group, watching. "That's Ezra Grady," Ms. Reed said, "the first guardian, and the Watcher's chosen." Jesse frowned. "Are you saying we have to find his descendants?" Ms. Reed nodded. "If we don't, the boundary will collapse. The Watchers will break through, and the camp, our world, will be consumed." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The stakes were higher than I ever imagined. The next day, we divided into search parties, combing the nearby towns and villages. Most locals avoided the forest, their faces tight with fear when we asked about the Grady family or anyone with ties to the old legends. In the small town of Tupper Lake, we found a man named Henry Grady. He was in his 60s, with weathered skin and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. When we approached him, his expression shifted from surprise to guarded caution. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said gruffly. But when Jesse showed him the photograph, his face paled. "Ezra was my grandfather," he admitted after a long silence. "I've always known the stories, but the Watchers, they've taken too much from our family." Henry told us about the burdens his ancestors bore, the strange gifts and terrible curses passed down through generations, the ability to see beyond the veil, to hear the whispers in the trees, but at a cost: isolation, madness, and sometimes death. "We live in the shadow of the Watchers," Henry said, "always watching, always waiting. When the boundary weakens, they call us back, whether we want to answer or not." That night, Henry came to the camp with us. His presence was unsettling, as if he carried a piece of the forest within him. As we prepared for the next ritual, he warned us, "The Watchers test us. They want to see who is worthy to bear their burden. The price of failure is not just death, it's becoming one of them." The fire crackled, shadows dancing across Henry's stern face. I realized then that the Watchers were not just guardians, they were jailers, wardens of a prison we barely understood. And the living boundary was the key. Henry Grady's arrival was like a storm breaking over the camp, unsettling, relentless, and impossible to ignore. His presence seemed to sharpen the forest's whispers into voices I could almost understand. The Watchers weren't just distant shadows anymore. They were a looming threat, pressing closer with every heartbeat. That night, under the choked canopy of ancient pines, Ms. Reed gathered the counselors and the campers in the main lodge. The air was thick with unease. "We're at a crossroads," she said, voice heavy. "The Watchers grow restless. The boundary is unraveling faster than we expected." I looked around at the faces, young, innocent, unaware of the full horror creeping around us. Henry spoke next, his voice gravelly but urgent. "The Watchers demand sacrifice, not always in blood, but in something just as precious, our very humanity. Each generation of guardians must give a part of themselves to hold the boundary. It's a debt passed down from Ezra to his children, and now to us." My heart pounded. "What happens if someone refuses?" I asked. Henry's eyes darkened. "They are claimed, transformed, bound to the Watchers, lost between worlds, neither alive nor dead." A cold dread settled over us all. Then came the part no one wanted to hear. The Watcher's demand would fall on someone soon, someone here. The oath of silence and guardianship wasn't just a ritual, it was a contract with a price. As if on cue, the forest around us seemed to shudder. Outside, the wind moaned like a living thing, branches scraping against windows like skeletal fingers. Suddenly, a scream shattered the tense silence. We rushed outside to find the campers gathered near the lake, staring into the dark water. The surface rippled violently, though the night was still. Emily's shoe floated there, bobbing like a ghost. "She's still alive," Jessie said breathlessly. "Or something is." Ms. Reed shook her head. "The Watchers toy with us. They show us what we want, then take it away. Henry stepped forward. We need to act. Now. He led us to an old stone altar deep in the forest, hidden beneath twisted roots and vines. The air was thick with ancient power, and the ground thrummed beneath our feet. Here is where the boundary was first sealed, Henry explained, and where it must be reforged. Ms. Reed began the chant again, her voice rising in a haunting melody that seemed older than time. As the ritual reached its peak, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if my heart was being squeezed by invisible hands. Then the Watchers appeared, not as shadowy figures this time, but as clear as day. Antlered, their faces half human, half beast, eyes glowing with a terrible light. They circled us, silent and terrifying. One reached out, brushing a cold finger against my forehead. Visions exploded behind my eyes, endless forests, fires burning under a blood-red sky, voices screaming from the darkness. I fell to my knees, gasping. Henry helped me up. "The price," he said softly. "The boundary demands a guardian." Ms. Reed looked at me, her eyes filled with sorrow and something else. Hope. "You must swear the oath," she said. I hesitated, the weight of the choice crushing me. To refuse meant becoming one of the Watchers, lost forever. To refuse meant becoming one of the Watchers, lost forever. To accept meant a lifetime bound to the forest's secrets, carrying its curse. I swallowed hard, the notebook heavy in my hands. "I swear," I whispered. The Watchers nodded once, then vanished into the night. The forest fell silent. But I knew this was only the beginning. Swearing the oath changed everything. At first it was subtle, like a shadow shifting just beyond my vision, a whisper brushing the edge of my mind. But as days passed, the forest's hold tightened, weaving into my thoughts and senses like ivy strangling an ancient tree. Ms. Reed watched me with a mix of sympathy and resignation. Jessie never left my side, her eyes searching for the friend I was before, but I could see her fear growing. Henry said little, but when he did, his words cut through the tension. "Once bound, there's no going back. You are part of the boundary now, a guardian between worlds. The Watchers will guide you, but they will also demand obedience." The camp changed too. The laughter of children seemed distant, swallowed by the forest's deepening silence. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, and the trees themselves seemed to lean closer, watching, waiting. One night the Watchers came again. They appeared by the lake, their antlered silhouettes framed by the moonlight. But this time they didn't circle us. They called to me. Their voices were a chorus of rustling leaves and cracking branches, ancient and terrible. "You carry the burden," they intoned. "Protect the boundary, keep the Watchers at bay." I reached out, and the cold touched my skin like ice. A surge of visions flooded me. Other worlds overlapping ours, places where time twisted and reality fractured. I understood then the true nature of the boundary, a fragile line holding back chaos, madness, and a darkness older than the mountains themselves. But the Watchers demanded vigilance and sacrifice. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn deeper into the forest's secrets. I learned to hear the whispers in the wind, to see shapes flickering between the trees. The camp's strange rules were no longer just warnings. They were commands etched into my soul. Emily was never found. Sometimes, at dusk, I thought I saw her standing at the forest's edge, her eyes wide and pleading. But the Watchers would not let her go. And neither could I. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jessie approached me, her voice trembling. "We have to leave. This place, it's not safe. Not anymore." I shook my head, the weight of the oath anchoring me here. "This is where I belong," I said softly. "To protect the camp, to keep the Watchers contained." She looked at me with tears in her eyes, but understood. Before she left, she handed me a small charm, a carved piece of pine wood shaped like an antler. "For protection," she whispered. "Now, as the camp's new guardian, I walk the forest paths alone, bound by rules I barely comprehend, watched by unseen eyes. The whispers never stop, the Watchers never rest, and the boundary must hold. Because if it fails, everything we know will be consumed by the dark beyond the trees. Before we move on, please donate me in the form of subscribe.